Paul to share, and he's going to be doing a combination of them, really, by experience of relapse, and he's asked Mark to do the segment.
Cheers.
Hey, Mark.
Half measures availed us nothing. We stood at the turning point. We asked his protection and care with complete abandon. Here are the steps we took, which I suggested as a programme of recovery. 1. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. 2. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. 3. Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand him. 4. Made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5. Admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6. Were entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. 7. Humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. 8. Made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. 9. Made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. 10. Continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. 11. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understand him, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. 12. Having had spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Many of us exclaimed, "What an order! I can't go through with it." Do not be discouraged. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. We are not saints. The point is that we are willing to grow along spiritual lines. The principles we have set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. Our description of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after make clear through pertinent ideas. That we are alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. That probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. That God could and would if he were sought.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
So I'm Paul, and I'm a recovered addict.
Hey, Paul.
You might have to excuse me a little bit because this was sprung on me about 20 minutes ago. So where to start, really? I chose that bit because that is exactly where it started for me. I think I've used cocaine and a million other drugs for some years. I could take or leave anything else, but coke was the drug that I couldn't leave. And I've probably used it for about 17 years. My wife was oblivious till probably about 5 years ago, and she found out and my parents found out after I'd stolen thousands of pounds, and I'll tell you more about that, I guess, in a minute. But and that was horrific. You know, what I'd put my wife and my parents through was horrific. I couldn't deal with that. I really struggled with it. At the time they found out, I then went to work away in London for 5 days a week. So every time I would go on a Sunday night, I'd spend 2 or 3 hours driving down the motorway crying my eyes out. Uncontrollably crying my eyes out, trying to work out if I was better off just driving off the edge of the motorway. Am I going to cause more damage if I carry on trying to sort it out? Is it going to cause, you know, I'd kind of get stuck on thinking about my little girl, who's 5 now, nearly, thinking about her and the impact that that'd have on her and my son, who's now 18, my wife, my parents, and that's the only thing that stopped me doing that. I think I felt that bad that I couldn't cope with it, and I managed to. I didn't know every week going to work whether I'd have anything to come back to. I'd got letters from debt collectors dropping through the door. I'd taken out payday loans. I'd sold this, I'd sold that. I was in a world of debt. So things would kind of just pick up a little bit, and my wife would ring me while I was at work and still had 3 or 4 days left of work, and a letter had dropped through the door, something else I haven't told her about. And if I'm honest, I couldn't remember half of it. I was off my face. So I kind of remember where things got really bad. My nan passed away, my wife was pregnant, she wasn't working. I took on my manager's job, which was double the wage. Why wouldn't you take it? But it was about 10 times the stress. I was working literally every hour of every day. Even when I was at home, I was on the phone. And my nan passed away, and I grew up living with my nan. So I had 1,000,001 good excuses, so I thought. And they were exactly that, good excuses to carry on, bury my head in the sand and try and block it all out. So I borrowed a bit of money off my mum, and you get to that point where you're kind of juggling everything and your head's permanently in like, oh God, well, I've just borrowed that from there, I've just had that from there, and I've got to put that back, and I've got to pay this next Friday, where am I going to get that from? And your head is constantly in that state of trying to work out what comes next so you don't trip yourself up and end up in a massive mess. So I borrowed a bit of money off my mum, and I saw that she'd taken it out of a tin in a wardrobe. It's only about 100 quid. And then they went away. First Christmas after we lost my nan, she went away with my dad, my sister, my granddad, so I kind of was without my family as well. And I got a key to the house, so I remember being short, I think, on rent, and I went in and just took the rent. I'll just take the rent and I'll cover the rent. I can put that back. I never noticed, I never go in that tin. It was actually money from when my nan passed away that I think she'd left for my granddad's funeral or something. There was about 7 grand in there, and about 3, 4, 5 months later, I realised the tin was empty. I'd kept going back, taking more money to pay the stuff, come away, do you know what, I'll just buy a gram. And then a few days later it was gone. I still needed the money to pay what I needed to pay. And I was convinced, absolutely convinced, I'll put that back, it's not a problem. And I didn't even realise how much I'd taken until the tin was empty. And then what do you do then? So suddenly one day my mum called and asked me to go around. I thought nothing of it. And I got there and she just threw this empty tin on the table. What the fuck's that? Where's that gone? So that kind of all come out there. They didn't tell my wife, and I kind of dealt with that and tried to deal with that for a little bit. Told them I'd stopped. I hadn't stopped at all. I'd just did it better than I did before. So eventually my wife found out. She found out my parents had known for a little bit, and things become horrific. I think we got a letter from the landlord to say that we'd be evicted if we didn't pay the rent, and she got no idea that things weren't even paid. So I dealt with all of that stuff. So it just gives you a bit of an idea really as to where things were. So I went to work in London, and I managed, I think, through sheer fear of what I'd done, I kind of tried to burden the guilt. I felt guilty. I couldn't cope. And I'll come on to kind of what I now know about that in a little bit. But I probably managed 6, 7, 8 months, I think, clean before then. I couldn't cope anymore, so I told myself I couldn't cope anymore with driving all the way to London, crying my eyes out uncontrollably, like couldn't even see where I was going. So I then bought some coke and sniffed that on the way down. And that was then the way that worked. Buy some coke, leave late on the night, buy some coke, get really sniffed up, stay in a hotel, and then be alright for work in the morning. And I've always managed to maintain a job. I've never, ever screwed up a job. I'll go in, I'll do a very good job, and that's it. And it doesn't interfere with work, so I'm alright. And that, again, is what I told myself. So that then continued for a little bit, and I thought I could manage it. I thought that I could use, like, another man. Lots of my friends do it. They can take it or leave it. They go out, have a bit of a party, they sniff loads of coke and whatever else, and they're done then. It's not a bother. So I put things in place. My wife had control of all the money, but then I very quickly worked out a way around that. Actually, if I'm staying in hotels, and like the hotels that I was staying in, some of them were like just cheap hotels, really, dives, some of them, because we couldn't afford for me to go and stay down there until I'd sorted my accommodation out. But I'd work a way around that. I needed more fuel than I actually needed to get there, or I'd buy less food while I was there, so I'd got more money available, so I could just buy more coke. And that lasted a while. I can't even tell you how long, because I can't remember massive parts of those few years, really. But eventually something happened, and my wife found out again, and that was horrific, because we've been through all this. I now know what I've caused my wife. I've seen it. I've seen the upset it's caused. I've been terrified I'd lose my family. She didn't tell anybody, because she was that embarrassed about it. She's quite a proud woman. Didn't even tell her mum and dad, so the only people she could talk to were my mum and dad. And if I'm honest, they're biased, and they're my mum and dad, and I'm sure they tried their hardest not to be, but so it all kicked off again, and then that was 10 times worse. How have I done this again? How can you be so stupid? You saw what it caused, and you felt all that pain and all that guilt, and you've struggled to deal with it for months. You've been 8 months clean. How can you be stupid enough to do it again? But the thing that I was the most fearful of was losing my wife and kids, losing my family, and the thing I really struggled with is what I've become, because I'd always been, I thought, the kind of person that would go out the way to help anyone. A real kind of strong moral person, like, you know, I'd always kind of step in if I thought someone was being wronged, or and try and kind of put things right and make things all right. And all of a sudden, I didn't know who I was anymore. Who would I become? Like, I've stolen, I've lied, I've done a million and one things. You know, I'd taken money from anywhere that it popped up. Really, if I thought I'd get away with it, and just might make someone think, "Oh shit, have I lost that? Where did I put it?" And I must have tortured my wife, you know, like, I don't know, lost 20 quid, I don't know where it's gone. You really need to start thinking where you're putting stuff more, you know, really put her through the mill. And I think convinced her that she was crazy, like, for quite some time. So I kind of went to the doctors after my first experience, and I asked for some support. I went with my dad, I told them what I was going through, and they referred me, they gave me anti-anxiety tablets, and they referred me to a local drugs team, local drugs centre. They wouldn't do a fat lot, really. They gave me a few sessions, and I managed to convince them to test me once a week. They couldn't do that on the day of their tests because I was in London. So I finally managed to get them to agree to do me as a private test once a week, and then at least I can take that back, and my wife knows I'm not using. But then I worked out that it only stays in your system for 3 days. So actually, if I use at the other end and now I've got my test there, I'm all right. So I guess my point is, like, the book will say, and for people that are new, the book will say that you put in strategies, you try and use your own will to control your using, you try desperately to make it like the next man's, so it's not a problem. Like, you know, surely I can, my mum does it with smoking cigarettes, you know, I'll just have the odd one, it's all right. But she'll give it for months at a time, she'll try and have the odd one, and then she ends up smoking again within a few days. And it's exactly the same. I think the book talks about not using strategies, they're not helpful, and I'm sure everybody can think of a million and one things they've done. You know, for me, my wife had control of the money, I had weekly tests, we even bought some tests at one point, and I convinced my wife that they were shit tests. Clearly they weren't shit tests, I was just sniffing coke again. A million and one things. I tried changing my job, I tried changing friends, but you know, you start spending time with other friends, and then you kind of wangle it into conversation somewhere, and all of a sudden you're doing it with other friends. It makes no difference. And I spent years, 4 or 5 years, trying to work out, my background's psychology, trying to work out what was wrong with me, what's happened to me in my childhood, what's happened to me in my life that's made me like this. It's got to be a root cause. You know, I've never met my real dad, is it anything to do with that? After about the 3rd or 4th relapse, and every relapse, everybody in here knows anyway, things get even more difficult. You know, you've done it again. You thought you were all right. Things were going well. And there's a bit in the book that also says, you know, it's not just to cope with when things are bad, because how many people have used when things are good? I just get to a point with my wife where actually, do you know what, we're making some headway here, and we're trying to get a little bit of trust back, and our relationship's improved a little bit, and all of a sudden then I'd go out on a spree again and just smash it all into the ground. But that was what I wanted, and I couldn't ever get my head around that. How mental must I be? That's not a very PC term, but how crazy must I be to go out and do the one thing that potentially means that I'm going to lose everything? That's what I actually want. That's insanity, and I couldn't get my head around that. So at some point I'd heard from a lot of relatives that I'm really like my dad, my real dad. I like my mannerisms and the way I speak and the way I kind of hold myself. And I sort of got to thinking, do you know what, maybe that's the problem. Maybe the problem is I need to meet my real dad, and I need to find out what else I'm capable of. So I did that. My mum got in touch with my real dad, only to find out that he'd become a massive coke addict a few years back and ended up in prison because he was selling coke to fund his own habit. So in my head, you know, well, of course that's where I've got it from. And that was another excuse, you know, that's where I've got it from. That's now a genetic issue, when it's definitely not a genetic issue, you know. I looked for years for the problem, and I'd say to my wife countless times, I don't know what's wrong with me, maybe it's this, maybe it's this. And looking back now and knowing what I know from this book and from being part of this fellowship, is it's all just excuses. I was looking in the wrong place. And I think to anyone particularly that's new, you can come up with a million and one excuses for why you've used, and some people have got it really hard. You know, I lost my nan And I had a really stressful job, and my wife was having a baby, and I needed to provide for the whole house financially. And we moved out at Christmas, and then my first Christmas without any of my family after my nan died. There's a lot of people in this room when I first come in that my story is nothing, you know. Like, some people in this room have had things so hard, and they've lost everything, you know, and things have then piled up even worse, as if anything could get any worse. But I very quickly learned that all of that is just an excuse. All of that's my way of being able to somehow just justify it somewhere deep in my mind, I think, you know, plenty of reasons. And I was permanently trying to occupy myself with looking for the problem, and actually, I never looked for a solution. So I had a relapse probably a couple of months ago. I started a business with somebody that I worked with down in London, and doubled my wage again. So I was on, I don't know, 70 grand a year. And it was brilliant. I was setting up this children's residential home. I'd written my own programme of care to work with really vulnerable kids and get them through like all the difficulties and out into a foster family when they otherwise would have a career in care homes miles away from home. And I'd written this programme and put all this stuff together, and then I'd drive down to work and just buy a bit of coke on the way down. And things were going all right then, you know. It had been quite a while, and things had got good with my wife again. Things were looking on the up. I was doing well business-wise, a lot of money coming in. Brilliant, you know, like, and then I just started buying coke. And my business partner years ago, and she knew this from when we first met, first time I went to London, she was a heroin addict years ago. And she kind of overcame that. However, she drinks quite a concerned amount now, but got to a point where I would drive down to work the night before I was due in. I'd stay on site in kind of a separate annex, and I'd just get off my face on the way down, but then I'd get paranoid and I'd have to just park up at services till I was alright, because how can I get in and see people that I work with and be the state that I was? So at some point, going back probably 2 weeks, my partner called me into a room and just said, something's going on with you, and she sacked me from my own business. And I was absolutely fuming. She got no reason to sack me. She thought something was going on, and alright, it was, but it hadn't impacted on my work. And she couldn't give me a reason for sacking me. She just had this inkling in her head that something was going on. She didn't even think it was that I'd relapsed. And I was fuming, like, absolutely, you know, I'm going to do this, and I could do this, and I could get my job back like this. And so at that point then things were desperate, and probably the most desperate I've ever been, because now my wife, I'm having to hold my wife, being the person that's done all this, I'm having to hold my wife while she can't breathe for half an hour having a panic attack, because I'd be the only person that can console her from that. However, I'm the person that's done it to her. How does that work? You know, as a person that fought for her to give up her independence and put a little bit of trust in me when we got together, I'd just constantly smash that into the ground. I'd broken her. So at this point she told her mum and dad, and I'd been telling her to tell her mum and dad for some time, and she would say, that'll be it. If I tell my mum and dad, that'll be it. And my thinking at the time was, do you know what, actually, you need to tell your mum and dad, you need someone to talk to, and if that is it, then that's it for a valid reason. You know, they're decent people, they get it, they're not gonna just cast me out. Like, if there's no need to, they'll understand if I'm making an effort. So anyway, I'd been to doctors again, and they'd referred me to this depression group. I tried to catch myself before it all came out this time, and I'd started doing this depression course online through like my local counselling service, and I kind of reached out to them for help, and they sent me a message back just kind of saying, you know, if what you're doing will work, just keep doing what you're doing. And I called and left a message, and she didn't get back to me. And so all of this came out, and my mum managed to get in touch with Tom, who I still haven't met actually. And I had a chat with Tom. My mum was on the phone for about an hour, I was on the phone for about an hour, and suddenly it all made sense. I'd been spending all this time like stuck in me and I and selfishness of like, I can't cope with this, I feel guilty, I can't do this anymore, I've got all the burden of providing for the family. I was so stuck in that I never even thought, like, even my thought for my wife, I've done this to my wife and I can't cope. It was all about me. So I come to the first meeting and I just heard loads of stories of other people that suffer from an illness that I suffer with, and I hadn't ever thought of it like that. I've got an illness, and I'm an alcoholic, I'm an addict, and the illness is twofold, and I think the idea behind it, and I've just completely lost my thread, but the idea behind it, for anyone that doesn't know, is that you fail to bring to memory with sufficient force all of the desperation and despair that you've caused in the past. And all of that lies in a blank spot in your mind, and that's how you end up then relapsing. You think of drugs and all of that switched off, you can't even access that. And if you can access it, it's a fleeting thought, and all of a sudden you're using again or you're drinking again, you know. I had a relapse experience after I'd been here for 3 weeks. I felt amazing. I'd got to step 4 and I'd started doing my step 4, writing down my harms, and felt amazing. I'd not felt like that since I could remember, if I ever had felt like it. Found a solution, and this is actually a solution, and knew it would work. But I only took the bits of it that I thought I needed. You know, I didn't pray every day because I don't know if I really believe in God anyway. I was brought up a Roman Catholic, but even if I think of a higher power as I believe it, which I think was the energy of the universe, you know, the power of mind, whatever it was, is I didn't set my day up every day by kneeling down and saying my prayers and giving my day over to God. So the point of the reading was, and I'll waffle on for hours if I don't do this, so I wanted to go through the steps and how important all of the steps are really, but the first 3 are really prominent, I think. So we admitted we were powerless over alcohol and that our lives had become unmanageable, and you've all heard how unmanageable mine was, and I'm sure most people in this room have been the same, you know. You came to believe that a power greater than yourself could restore us to sanity. Now that's a big one, because I don't know if I necessarily believe that. I believed in following this as a solution, but I don't know if I necessarily gave myself to that. So there's a really good chapter called Reagnostics, and most of you have read it anyway, but the idea behind it is you've tried everything else. That's surely you'd be foolish to not just give something else a go. If it doesn't work, it didn't work. But at least give it a fair hearing, you know. How many things have you put in place? How long have you tried to keep that control and control it? And actually all you need to do is say that you can't. You can't control it, but you will follow this, and you will put your day in God's hands. And step 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. It doesn't have to be God. It's very much turned into that for me. I think I read Reagnostics because I relapsed after about 3 weeks. Dead excited, I'm getting to 30 days, and just all of a sudden I'd ended up in a situation where I'd got enough money in my hand to go and buy half a gram of coke, and I thought, that's really stupid. Why would you go and do that? All the stuff you've caused. First time I ever caught myself and thought that like that, and it was really clear, like, you need to not do it. And all of a sudden it's in my hand and I'm sniffing it. And that was nuts. I think I felt that good that I didn't remain humble. I didn't remember that I was an addict, and I didn't remember that at any point that could come back and bite me, and I could end up in exactly the same situation if I didn't keep my spiritual connection and grow spiritually. So step 4 is next, and step 4 is you make a searching and fearless moral inventory of yourselves. You really spend all of your time thinking about everything that you've done, everyone you've harmed, everything you're fearful of, and you have to think about your part in all of that. You know, were you selfish, were you dishonest, the problem that you've caused for that person, why you're resentful for that person or organisation. And it's a really difficult bit. It's a real easy thing to get stuck on, because a lot of the issue for a lot of people is that they've done things that they can't even get their head around. You know, how can you possibly have done what you've done? And now you've got to write it down, and not only that, you've got to admit it to another man, and you've got to hope that you're not judged, and you never will be judged here, because I guarantee you that every other person in this room has done at least as bad, if not worse, you know. So the last bit, and what I want to take you out on is this really, is if you're at that stage, it's really important to just be honest and not hold anything back from doing your step 4. Get everything out. People will understand you. Hopefully people that I knew or at that point have heard from me how stupid I've been, I guess, and some of the things I've done that I'm not proud of. But page 83, says if we are painstaking about this phase of our development, we'll be amazed before we're halfway through. We're going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past, nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity, and we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. The feeling of usefulness and self-pity will disappear. We'll lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. We'll suddenly realise that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. And as much as I didn't necessarily believe in that aspect of God, having experienced what I've experienced over the past couple of months, going through that step 4, going through it with my other man, I even felt like to do it in front of God, I needed to go to church and book an appointment with a priest and do it face to face with him as well. So I did that, and I've never ever felt that, what I felt then, and I've never felt so weightless and light since. You know, I've got all that off my chest, and actually it doesn't matter. What matters is what I do now. What matters is that I carry out God's will now, and the only way I can explain any of that is a spiritual awakening. So that's it. That's all I've got. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Paul.